The wedding venue was everything you'd expect from a man obsessed with proving his worth. Crystal chandeliers hanging from cathedral ceilings, tables draped in ivory silk, and champagne flowing like water. Marcus Anderson stood at the altar in his custom Italian suit, one hand clasped with his bride Victoria, the other wiping sweat from his palm. He had everything now. The business. The mansion. The woman who looked perfect on his arm. But there was one more thing he needed. One final act to cement his victory over the past. He'd sent the invitation 3 weeks ago. To a woman he once promised forever. The woman he'd thrown away like yesterday's newspaper. He wanted her to see what she'd lost. He wanted her to sit in that crowd and watch him marry someone better. Someone worthy of the life he'd built. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine as he stood there grinning at his guests, was that in exactly 7 minutes, the sound of a private jet would tear through the air outside that venue. And when those doors opened, when she stepped out with 3 little boys holding her hands, every single person in that room would forget his name. They'd forget his bride. They'd forget everything except the woman he once called worthless. Because sometimes, God doesn't just restore what you've lost. Sometimes He gives you back everything they said you'd never have, multiplied by 3. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 5 years earlier, Rachel Martinez was the kind of woman people didn't notice in a crowd. She wore simple clothes, spoke softly, and believed that love meant sacrificing everything for the person you chose. She met Marcus when they were both starting out, both struggling, both dreaming of something better than the cramped apartments and ramen noodle dinners that marked their early 20s. He was working as a junior sales associate at a tech startup, coming home exhausted every night, talking about the big break that would change everything. Rachel worked 2 jobs, one as a receptionist during the day and another as a waitress on weekend nights. And every dollar she didn't spend on rent went into a jar labeled Our Future. She believed in him when no one else did. When his own mother said he'd never amount to anything, Rachel was the one who stayed up until 3 in the morning helping him prepare presentations. When he needed $5,000 to invest in a business opportunity that could have been his ticket out, Rachel sold the only valuable thing she owned, a necklace her grandmother had left her, without telling him where the money came from. She just smiled and said she'd been saving. That's what love looked like to Rachel. Invisible sacrifices. Quiet strength. The kind of devotion that doesn't ask for credit or applause. And for a while, Marcus seemed to love her for it. He'd hold her close on their tiny apartment balcony, and whisper promises about the life they'd build together. But something happened when Marcus's big break finally came. The startup he'd invested in exploded, and suddenly he wasn't just a sales associate anymore. He was a junior partner, then a senior partner, then the kind of man who wore watches that cost more than Rachel's car. The apartment became a townhouse. The townhouse became a penthouse. And somewhere between the old life and the new one, Marcus started looking at Rachel differently. It wasn't something he said at first. It was in the way he'd flinch when she showed up to his company events in dresses from outlet stores. It was in the way he'd introduce her to his new colleagues with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. The way he'd steer conversations away from how they met. His mother, who'd once dismissed him as a failure, suddenly reappeared in his life, dressed in designer clothes and offering opinions about everything from his investments to his choice of wife. And she made no secret of what she thought about Rachel. Too simple. Too plain. Too poor. Not the kind of woman a man of Marcus's stature should be seen with. Marcus started coming home later. Started missing dinners. Started talking less about we and more about I. Rachel told herself it was just stress, just the pressure of his growing success. She convinced herself that if she loved him harder, supported him more, he'd remember why they started this journey together. But you can't love someone back into loving you. And one cold February evening, Marcus came home, poured himself a drink, and said the words that shattered Rachel's world. "I need you to understand something," he said, not even looking at her. "I've outgrown this. I've outgrown us. You're a good person, Rachel. But you're not the woman I need anymore. You'll only hold me back." Rachel stood there in the kitchen she'd decorated with her own hands, wearing the apron she'd bought at a thrift store, and felt something inside her chest crack open. She didn't scream, didn't beg. She just asked one question. "After everything I gave you?" Marcus finally looked at her then, and his eyes were cold. "That's the problem," he said. "You gave too much. You made yourself small. And now I need someone who matches where I am." He moved out that weekend. Left her with the lease on an apartment she couldn't afford, bills in both their names, and a heart so broken she wasn't sure it would ever beat properly again. What Marcus didn't know, what Rachel herself didn't know until 2 weeks after he left, was that she was carrying his children. 3 of them. When Rachel saw the positive pregnancy test, she didn't cry. She was past crying. She sat on the bathroom floor of that too expensive apartment and pressed her hand against her still flat stomach and made a choice. She would not let this destroy her. She would not let Marcus's abandonment define the rest of her life, or the lives of the 3 tiny humans growing inside her. She moved out of that apartment the following month, found a 1-bedroom place in a neighborhood that wasn't pretty but was safe enough, and started working every hour she could stand. By her 2nd trimester, she was cleaning houses during the day and doing data entry at night, her back aching, her feet swollen, her body begging for rest she couldn't afford to take. The day she went into labor, 5 weeks early, she was alone. She took an Uber to the hospital because she couldn't afford an ambulance, and she held her own hand through every contraction because there was no one else to hold. When the doctor told her she was having triplets, Rachel laughed. Actually laughed. Because of course life would make this even harder. But when they placed those 3 tiny boys in her arms, each one barely 5 pounds, each one fighting to breathe, something shifted in Rachel's chest. These babies didn't ask to be born into this situation. They didn't ask for a father who walked away or a mother who was hanging on by a thread. They just needed her to survive. So she did. She named them Daniel, Michael, and Gabriel. Danny, Mikey, and Gabe. And for the first year of their lives, survival looked like diapers bought with whatever money she had left after rent, formula mixed with a little extra water to make it stretch, and nights when Rachel went to bed hungry so her sons could eat. She applied for every kind of assistance she qualified for, and felt no shame. Pride doesn't feed babies. There were moments when Rachel would sit in her car after a 12-hour shift, too exhausted to even turn the key, and wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake by choosing to keep going. But then one of the boys would smile at her, or reach for her face with his tiny hand, and she'd remember why she was fighting. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Gabe, the smallest of the 3, developed a fever that wouldn't break. Rachel rushed him to a free clinic on the edge of town, her heart pounding, her hands shaking as she filled out paperwork she could barely read through her tears. That's where she met Dr. Eleanor Hayes. Dr. Hayes was in her 60s, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul. She examined Gabe with gentle hands, prescribed medication Rachel couldn't afford, and then did something Rachel didn't expect. She asked questions. Not about Gabe's symptoms. About Rachel. About how she was managing. About what she needed. And when Rachel finally broke down and told her everything, Dr. Hayes didn't offer pity. She offered a job. Dr. Hayes ran a nonprofit called Second Chances, an organization that helped single mothers get back on their feet through education, job training, and childcare support. She needed someone to manage the administrative side, someone who understood what these women were going through because she'd lived it. The pay wasn't much, but it came with free childcare, health insurance, and something Rachel hadn't felt in over a year. Hope. Rachel threw herself into that job like her life depended on it, because in many ways it did. She arrived early, stayed late, and learned everything she could about nonprofit management, fundraising, and community outreach. Dr. Hayes became more than a boss. She became a mentor, a mother figure, a woman who saw potential in Rachel that Rachel had forgotten existed. Within 6 months, Rachel had reorganized the entire administrative system, secured 2 major grants, and increased the organization's donor base by 40%. Within a year, she was promoted to Director of Operations. Within 2 years, she was Dr. Hayes's right hand, the person people called when they wanted to partner with Second Chances, the face of success stories that proved second chances were real. But Rachel's transformation wasn't just professional. Somewhere between the sleepless nights and the small victories, she'd stopped being the woman who made herself small. She'd stopped apologizing for taking up space. She'd learned to speak up in meetings, to negotiate for what she deserved, to walk into rooms full of wealthy donors and tell them exactly why they should invest in women like her. She'd learned that being broken didn't mean being weak. And people noticed. 3 years after she started at Second Chances, a venture capital firm that had partnered with the nonprofit approached Rachel with an offer. They wanted her to launch and lead a for-profit consulting company that would help businesses develop social impact programs. They'd provide the funding. She'd provide the vision and the leadership. Rachel said yes. By the time her sons turned 4, Rachel Martinez was the CEO of Impact Solutions, a consulting firm that had worked with some of the biggest companies in the country. She lived in a beautiful home in a safe neighborhood, drove a car that didn't break down every other week, and had a bank account that let her breathe. But more than any of that, she'd kept her heart soft. She hadn't let bitterness poison her. She'd turned her pain into purpose, and her purpose into power. She hadn't heard from Marcus in those 5 years. Hadn't looked him up, hadn't asked mutual friends about him. Hadn't let herself wonder if he ever thought about her, or the children he didn't know existed. She closed that chapter of her life and moved forward. Until the invitation arrived. It came in a cream-colored envelope with gold lettering, addressed to Ms. Rachel Martinez. Inside was a wedding invitation, so elaborate it probably cost more than Rachel used to make in a month. Marcus Anderson and Victoria Westbrook request the honor of your presence as they celebrate their union. Rachel stared at that invitation for a long time, turning it over in her hands, reading the words again and again. Her assistant, Jennifer, found her sitting at her desk an hour later, still holding it. "Everything okay?" Jennifer asked. Rachel looked up, and for the first time in years, Jennifer saw something dangerous flash in her boss's eyes. Not anger. Something sharper. Something that looked almost like clarity. "Do you remember when I told you about my ex-husband?" Rachel asked. "The one who left you when you were pregnant?" "That's the one. He just invited me to his wedding." Jennifer's jaw dropped. "You're kidding." Rachel shook her head, a slow smile spreading across her face. "He wants me there. He wants me to watch him marry someone else. He wants me to see everything he has now, everything I supposedly wasn't good enough for." "That's cruel," Jennifer said. "That's Marcus," Rachel replied. She stood up, walked to the window of her corner office, and looked out at the city below. "What are you going to do?" Jennifer asked. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to go." "What?" "I'm going to that wedding. But not because he wants me there. Because I want to show my sons something important." "What's that?" "That you never let someone else's opinion of you become your reality. That you can rise from the ashes. That grace isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing you can choose." Jennifer grinned. "So we're doing this?" "We're doing this," Rachel said. "But we're doing it right." The day of Marcus's wedding arrived with perfect weather, the kind of crystalline autumn afternoon that makes everything look like a movie. Rachel dressed carefully, not in anything flashy or obviously expensive, but in a simple, elegant navy dress that whispered class rather than shouted it. Her hair was styled, her makeup subtle, her jewelry minimal. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had nothing to prove. The boys wore matching gray suits, their hair combed, their little faces serious as Rachel explained where they were going. "Are we going to meet our daddy?" Danny asked. Rachel's heart clenched, but her voice stayed steady. "We're going to a wedding, baby. That's all." "Why?" Mikey asked. "Because sometimes we do hard things to show ourselves how strong we've become," Rachel said. She didn't tell them that she'd arranged for a car service. She didn't tell them that the car service wasn't just a car. It was a private jet, chartered for the occasion, because if she was going to do this, she was going to do it in a way that made a statement without saying a word. When they arrived at the venue, the jet touched down on a private airstrip just visible from the wedding location. Rachel had timed it perfectly. The ceremony was about to begin, and she could see guests moving toward the entrance, could hear music starting to play. She took her son's hands, one on each side, with Gabe holding tight to Danny's other hand, and they walked toward the venue. The sound came first. The low roar of the jet, impossible to ignore, cutting through the string quartet, and the polite murmur of conversation. People turned, started pointing, moved toward the windows. And then they saw her. Rachel Martinez, walking across the grounds like she owned them, her head high, her 3 beautiful boys at her side, the jet gleaming behind her in the afternoon sun. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the crowd like electricity. Who is that? Is that his ex-wife? Did she just arrive in a private jet? Are those children? They look just like him. Inside the venue, Marcus heard the commotion and felt his stomach drop. He looked at Victoria, who was staring out the window with her mouth open, and he knew. Before he even turned around, he knew. Rachel walked through those doors like she'd been invited to a gala. Not a wedding designed to humiliate her. She didn't rush. Didn't hesitate. Just moved through that crowd with quiet confidence, nodding politely at people who stared, smiling at the ones who had the decency to smile back. Marcus couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what he was seeing. This wasn't the Rachel he remembered. The woman standing in front of him now wasn't broken or diminished or desperate for his approval. She was radiant, powerful, complete. And the 3 little boys holding her hands were unmistakably his. They had his eyes, his smile, his face looking back at him in triplicate. Victoria gripped his arm. "Marcus," she hissed. "Who are those children?" But Marcus couldn't answer. Couldn't do anything but stare as Rachel approached them. Her sons trailing behind her like little princes. When she reached Marcus and Victoria, she stopped. The entire venue had gone silent. Every eye was on them. Every camera phone was recording. Rachel looked at Marcus for a long moment, and he saw everything in that look. The nights she'd spent crying. The meals she'd skipped. The dreams she'd buried. The strength she'd found. And then she smiled. Not a bitter smile. Not a triumphant smile. Just a smile that said she'd moved beyond him. Beyond this, beyond the version of herself who'd once believed she needed his approval to have value. "Congratulations," Rachel said simply. She held out a small gift box, wrapped in silver paper. Marcus took it automatically, his hands shaking. "I wanted to thank you," Rachel continued, her voice carrying across the silent room. "For leaving. For showing me that I was strong enough to build a life on my own. For giving me 3 reasons to become the woman I was always meant to be." She gestured to her sons, who looked up at Marcus with curious eyes. "Boys, say hello to Mr. Anderson." "Hello, Mr. Anderson," they chorused. Victoria made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Marcus's mother, sitting in the front row, looked like she might faint. And Marcus just stood there, the gift box in his hands, watching the woman he'd thrown away turn and walk back through that crowd with more dignity than he'd ever possessed. People parted for her like waves. Some of them nodded. A few older women smiled. And as Rachel reached the doors, she heard it. Applause. It started with one person. Then another. Then a wave of it, rolling through the venue. People clapping for the woman who'd been invited to be humiliated, and instead had shown them what grace looked like. Rachel didn't turn around. She just took her son's hands and walked out into the sunlight, back toward the jet that would carry them home. Marcus opened the gift box with shaking hands after Rachel left. Inside were 3 things. 3 watches, expensive but not ostentatious, each engraved with a name. Daniel, Michael, Gabriel, and a note, written in Rachel's handwriting. "They ask about you sometimes. I tell them their father is a man who had to lose everything to learn what mattered. I don't know if that's true, but I hope someday it will be. If you ever want to be part of their lives, you know where to find me. But I won't wait for you. I waited once. I won't make that mistake again." Marcus sank into a chair, the watches clutched in his hands, and felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Regret. Not for leaving Rachel, though he felt that too, but for missing the first 4 years of his sons' lives. For choosing pride over love. For believing that success meant having more instead of being more. Victoria stood over him, her face pale. "You have children?" she whispered. "I didn't know," Marcus said. "She never told me." "Because you left her," Victoria said, and there was something sharp in her voice now. "You left her, and she was pregnant, and you didn't even know." "I didn't know," Marcus repeated, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Around them, the wedding guests were whispering, some leaving, others clustered in groups talking about what they'd just witnessed. Marcus's mother approached, her face tight. "We need to do damage control," she said. "The press is going to have a field day with this." But Marcus wasn't listening. He was thinking about Rachel, about the woman he'd known and the woman she'd become. He was thinking about 3 little boys who looked like him but didn't know him. He was thinking about the life he could have had if he hadn't been so desperate to prove he was worth something to people who didn't matter. The wedding continued, but it was a hollow affair. Half the guests had left. The ones who stayed were distracted, checking their phones as videos of Rachel's arrival went viral on social media. By the end of the night, Marcus Anderson's wedding wasn't trending because of how beautiful it was. It was trending because of the woman he'd once thrown away, who'd shown up and reminded everyone watching that grace is more powerful than revenge, that dignity can't be bought, and that sometimes the person you underestimate becomes the person you'll never forget. 6 months later, Marcus sat in his car outside Rachel's office building, working up the courage to go inside. He'd reached out weeks ago, asking if he could meet his sons, and Rachel had agreed. But she'd been clear. This wasn't about him. This wasn't about giving him what he wanted. This was about giving her boys the chance to know their father, if he could prove he was worth knowing. When he finally walked into her office, Rachel was on the phone, managing what sounded like a crisis with calm authority. She gestured for him to sit, finished her call, and turned to face him. "Thank you for seeing me," Marcus said. Rachel nodded. "The boys are at school. We'll meet them together this afternoon. But first, we need to talk." "I know," Marcus said. "I know I don't deserve this chance." "You don't," Rachel agreed. "But they deserve the chance to know you. So I'm giving you that. But Marcus, if you hurt them, if you let them down the way you let me down, I will not give you another chance. They've had 4 years without you, and they're thriving. You need to prove that having you in their lives will make things better, not worse." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "I want to try," he said. "I want to be their father. Not just provide for them, though I'll do that too. I want to actually be there." Rachel studied him for a long moment. "Then prove it," she said. "Not with money. Not with gifts. With time. With showing up. With being the man they can count on." "I will," Marcus promised. And for the first time in years, Rachel saw something in his eyes that looked like the man she'd once loved. Not the arrogant success who'd thrown her away, but the struggling, scared, hopeful man who'd once promised her forever. She didn't trust it yet. Wouldn't let herself believe it until he'd proven it over months and years. But she gave him the chance. Because that's what grace looks like. Not pretending the past didn't hurt. Not forgetting what was lost. But choosing to believe that people can change, even when they've given you every reason to walk away. Rachel's story didn't end with that wedding. It didn't end with Marcus finally stepping up to be a father to his sons, though he did slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. So let me ask you, if this was your story, what would you have done? Would you have attended that wedding? Would you have shown grace or sought revenge? Would you have given him a second chance with his children? Or would you have walked away and never looked back? There's no wrong answer. Because this isn't about judging anyone's choices. It's about understanding that we all carry pain, and we all get to decide what we do with it. We can let it poison us. Or we can let it push us toward becoming the person we were always meant to be. Rachel chose the second option. And in choosing it, she didn't just change her life. She changed her sons' lives. She changed the lives of every woman who came through her foundation, and saw proof that broken doesn't mean finished. She even, in some small way, changed Marcus's life by showing him what he'd lost and giving him the chance to become someone better. That's the power of grace. That's the power of refusing to stay broken. That's the power of pain transformed into purpose. And that power is available to every single one of us, no matter what we've lost, no matter who's walked away, no matter how impossible the road ahead looks. Because God doesn't waste pain. He uses it to build something stronger than what was broken. He uses it to create testimonies that will inspire generations. He uses it to turn victims into victors and mourning into dancing. But you have to be willing to keep walking, to keep fighting, To keep believing that your story isn't over just because someone else decided they didn't want to be part of it. Your story is just beginning, and the chapters ahead might be more beautiful than anything you left behind. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Share it with the single mother who's barely holding on. Share it with the woman who just got left. Share it with anyone who's been told they're not enough and needs to remember that they are more than enough. They are everything. And so are you. Where are you watching this from, and what part of Rachel's story resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories, your own journeys from brokenness to breakthrough. Because every story matters. Every struggle has purpose. And every person watching this right now has the potential to rise from whatever ashes they're standing in and become something beautiful. Just like Rachel did. Just like you will.